Welcome everybody to the next MLH Cross GitHub Education live stream. Now today we're going to be talking all about how to get started in open source, and we've also got a few of our previous fellows from batch 2 to kind of talk about their experiences and share some of their top tips with you on how you can get started and how you can get involved with the MLH Fellowship this summer and this fall. Now, before we jump straight into things, we've got an exciting announcement today, and I want to make sure you all are aware of it. But beforehand, let me know if you're in chat. Come say hi, come say hey, tweet about us on Twitter and tag at MLHacks and at GitHub Education. We'd love to see many of your posts, and we'll repost any of the ones that we really like, so get your posts in. We can't wait to see them. However, exciting announcement time. We have just launched a fourth track of the MLH Fellowship called the Production Engineering track powered by Facebook. Now, if you're based in the US, Canada, or Mexico, and you are going to be graduating in August 2022 or later, we would love to see as many of you apply to get involved in this production engineering track. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what production engineering is, don't you worry, we're going to run into that too before we jump into things. But production engineering is actually a really crucial part of the technology in the world every single day. Now, you know, when you use all these online platforms and stuff, they are all running in, cloud, and all using these kind of DevOps kind of stuff in order to be able to, handle as many users and be able to scale. And, that's why when we try and, go to YouTube or try and send a tweet, it all just works. And so it's an incredibly important part because if anyone's tried to build an app and then have lots of people use it, as we all know, it's definitely quite important to make sure it can handle as many users. So yeah, if you want to find out more information, you can find out more at fellowship.mlh.io. Applications are open today and they'll be closing on May 28th. We'd love to see as many of you apply as possible, but again, you can find out all the information you need on the website. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce our guests. We've got 3 of them lined up, all with kind of different backgrounds, so I can't wait to hear all about that. First of all, we have Soham, who is from, I believe, one of the open source pods from batch 2. Soham, are you ready to come on stream and come and chat to us a little bit about your experiences in open source? Give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Perfect. Hello. How's it going? You're currently on mute, my friend.
Yeah, sorry for that.
Excellent. No worries. Wonderful stuff. So who are you and what are you currently studying out of interest?
So I'm Soham. I'm currently in my 4th year of undergrad in computer engineering, and I'm finishing my undergrad in, I think, June 2020 of this year. So it's pretty close to graduation for me.
Awesome stuff. Now, you've just been part of our Batch 2 Fellowship working on open source, working on actually quite a cool number of projects, actually. You worked on Resumify, QLab, and WebXR layers, is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Awesome. Now, obviously, when you started out, had you actually contributed to open source before, or was it still quite kind of a new territory for you?
So for me, I think it's a bit different because I was a part of Google Summer of Code with Wikimedia Foundation. So I had some sort of experience with open source, but not to an extent where I'm contributing on such a large scale, something that's being used live, something like WebXR. So that was a first for me. And I would say, even though I had some experience with open source, it was completely a new experience altogether. It's really different for me.
Interesting. So how do you so obviously it was quite new to you, as you said. How did you find that in initial kind of when you first started finding out which project you were working on and kind of getting started? How did you find that experience? Was it a little bit overwhelming or did it kind of make sense, or was it a little bit, a bit difficult at first?
To be honest, I wasn't actually prepared for WebXR because I had another project at my first pick. But I'm actually glad that I got picked with WebXR because had it been on my own, I would have never ventured into AR VR for web, and that is something that's considered a future in the way we consume content. And it was really overwhelming because I've never worked with AR VR or anything related to 3D rendering before. So we had to learn a lot of cool libraries and stuff, and it was definitely very, very intense. Also, especially since most of the documentation that was around was for browser developers.
Awesome. So you hadn't actually worked with WebXR before. Was it completely new to you? But you got a chance to really work on some new stuff, and imagine you learned quite a lot of actually new stuff as well in the process. What would you say like your main the kind of key things you learned at the start when you got started were with this WebXR layers? Was it kind of working out how to work in a team, or working out how to like work with the maintainers and stuff? What would you say?
It's actually neither of two. So funny story is it's actually how to read a documentation correctly. Like I mentioned, most of the documentation that existed was for browser implementers. So those who actually write down browsers like Chromium and Firefox. So we had to sort of nitpick sections that were relevant to our project, and at the same time not get lost in details which are not relevant to us. So that's something that's really cool that I learned throughout the fellowship.
So you mentioned about, and I imagine this is a problem with any open source project ever, is not getting stuck in the details that kind of aren't relevant to what you're trying to do. Now, is that something that you'd actually encountered before, or is this a fairly new thing for you?
I have encountered it before, but not to the scale or the extent that this project had. To be honest, there's always a walkthrough or a guide through with how you can navigate through a project. But with WebXR, especially the documentation that existed was something that usually people who are really experienced, refer to. So that was definitely a first for me. I mean, we had to constantly be reminding each other. There was one more pod fellow that I was working with, and we had to constantly be careful that we're referring to the right documentation, because it's easy to get lost.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, that sounds really, really awesome. Now, when you were working on it and stuff, you worked on some stuff that you may not have been familiar with before. And so you had to like kind of learn stuff on the job. How did you kind of find that? Did you find it kind of like fairly intuitive to kind of learn things as you went? Or was it kind of a little bit kind of a bit of a steep learning curve?
It was actually very steep, to be honest, because at the beginning, we'd never worked with WebXR, like neither me nor my fellow contributor. So we had spent like a lot of time, discussing what we were reading. So I read a page in a particular day, and then I would hit him up and tell him like, hey, this is the part I read, and do you have any ideas about this? Maybe I can explain it to you. And he would explain me some other section. So that's definitely, I think, the true essence of how we were able to complete the project was completely collaboration. And had it not been for him, I don't think like I would have been able to finish the entire project off on my own.
Interesting. So how did you find the teamwork aspect? Obviously you said it was very, very important, but had you like worked in teams much before? Did you get to learn about team dynamics as part of this experience of working on open source as part of the fellowship?
I have never worked with a team that is so dedicatedly focused on a specific project for 3 months. So that is definitely something that was a first for me. To be honest, it was a completely new experience, because you usually don't get to work on projects that are at such a large scale through internships or something. So definitely teamwork aspect with interactions with the pod leader as well as the Raise.dev coach together with the maintainers. All of them together were kind of key ingredients to help us get to the ending point of completing the project. Awesome.
Now that we've got a load of people watching in chat, you can probably see them all saying hello. Some people are saying your voice is echoing. Hopefully it's not doing that anymore. Now, have you got any top tips of advice for the folks who are watching along, who maybe haven't done the fellowship, maybe interested in doing the fellowship, or maybe just interested in getting started in open source? The fellowship is a great opportunity to get started in open source, but you're not, there's nothing limit, there's no reason why you can't just start getting into open source now. It's one of the beauties of it. And so do you have any useful tips for anyone who is looking to get started?
The only tip that I would give is just get started with it. A lot of people think a lot before getting started with it, maybe because they feel it'll be really overwhelming, or just because they get lost in the code. So any sort of contribution, maybe even if it's in the form of a documentation, is meaningful. And just get started with it, and don't think about how complicated it's going to be. There will be people who will help you out at each stage. So it's always going to be a smooth curve compared to other avenues that you pick out in software.
Awesome. Now, you obviously work with a maintainer during the project, and the maintainer probably was very useful in helping kind of guide you in the right direction, because in open source, actually, it's an important thing. You may think of a cool thing to add to a project, but and if you're interested, I actually did a Q&A with David Lord from the Flask Palettes project, and so that's stuff like Flask, Click, Ginger. That's the other one as well. I did a Q&A. You can find it on the MLH YouTube channel at youtube.com/majorleaguehacking. And I'd highly recommend going and checking that out, because we talk all about how, working on open source and as a maintainer's perspective. And so one of the issues that maintainers have is people want to add all sorts of features, right? They often run into two problems. The issue section on GitHub gets fulfilled with people having problems not understanding how to use the project, as in they have a bug with their own code. It's not a bug with Flask, it's a bug with the way they're using Flask, and so it's their problem, not Flask. Sometimes it is a legit problem, right? Like Flask isn't doing the thing it's supposed to, but it's mostly because they've misunderstood the documentation and so on. And so something like that would be more appropriate for a community Discord, something like Stack Overflow, whereas not really appropriate for a GitHub issues. And so he was saying how you run into the issue of getting kind of spam issues like that, but then the other issue you run into is people wanting to add new features to, a feature that would be really specific to their use case. But this is actually an interesting perspective, right? So one of the issues you have as a maintainer is you want to make your project as awesome as possible, right? And you want the community to be able to add all these cool things, but the more features you add, the more things you have to maintain over time, and the more things you have to more things that have to make sure aren't breaking when you add new things. The more things you add, the more things are going to break. And so some features are better off as a plugin or an extension rather than being into the core thing. And as you make things bigger as well, right, it gets to the point where it's slower, it's larger, it's bigger than it needs to be. And so that was interesting. I found that really interesting talking. I hadn't really thought about it like that. And so out of interest, how was your kind of experience working with a maintainer and understanding which issues to pick and so on?
It was amazing. Personally, the project that we were starting out on was completely new. So we had our own repo, and we were pretty much starting from scratch. So we didn't have any issues that we had to pick from, luckily. But throughout the interactions were really fun. To be honest, I was a bit overwhelmed in the beginning, thinking he's so experienced and I don't want to screw that up. But over a period of time, I think to be honest, there was a lot of mathematical things also that discussions that we needed to have. And throughout the experience with the maintainer was amazing.
Awesome. Interesting. Well, hopefully that's some useful advice for the folks listening. It's not often that you get to chat so closely with a maintainer, and that's one of the real kind of benefits when you were starting out, is you get that kind of close relationship. Now, I want to dig a little bit deeper into some of the pull requests you made. Now, I have a list of the pull requests you made, fortunately, because you gave me a list beforehand. And so, are these in the order? I mean, I'll read them out, but are they in the order that you did them in? So, first one was adding hand interactions with layers. Is that the first one you did?
No, so the first one I did was the repo itself, because we built it from scratch. So what we did was we picked a previous code, and we sort of integrated Snowpack with it and a build stage, so that it's a bit modular, and it's easier for us to work on later, because the old code was native. It's a vanilla JavaScript, so it was really not that maintainable or easy to understand for a new contributor. And after that, I think the next major pull request I worked on was the hands interaction.
Interesting. So when you worked on this pull request, did you initially get assigned it? Did you have to go through the issues? And actually, any top tips that you have for going through issues and finding an issue that you can get started with? Because I think people think with open source they have to add a new feature, but there's a lot of bugs often that need to get squashed, right? Some really big, some very simple. It's just finding someone hasn't found the time to do it, and so maybe you can be the first person to do that. Did you have any advice on how you kind of tackled that?
Yeah, so it's not just about issues and finding bugs, but also there are pull requests that are often lying around unattended. So you can actually pick those and also ask maintainers if this is still relevant, or can we just close this if it's already been done before, or if it's just an issue where you have just a person who's asking a question. You can actually try answering those questions as well. Increase engagement on that particular repo, and then eventually start contributing to docs, and then maybe eventually to the actual code itself. That's a really good pipeline to contribute to any project which is really complicated.
Awesome. Well, hopefully that's some useful advice. I can see people are putting questions in the chat. We'll be doing a Q&A towards the end, so definitely get your questions in. I definitely don't want to miss any of them. Awesome stuff. And then your next pull request you added was that the incorporating fluid resizing for layers. So at this point, you've already kind of got yourself a little bit familiar with how it works. I imagine you probably found this one a little bit easier to get stuck in with because you'd already kind of worked out what you needed to know and what you didn't need to know and kind of worked out that stuff.
To be honest, it was the opposite. This is the pull request we spent. Yeah. Because a lot of things that we were trying out were being done for the first time, and our maintainer Rick was like, you're free to experiment because these things haven't been done before. So any code that you write will be used by other people to refer, and then they can write their own code. So we spent a lot of time researching on how we can make the code as efficient as possible, and the experience for the user to be like as precise in terms of the deliverables.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There must feel like a lot of pressure to be able to, have to write this code that is written in a way that means matches kind of the styling of the rest of the project, but also is super easy for other people to jump in and get started with.
Yeah. And to be honest, like the only different part about the last pull request was it required both me and Theo to work together on it. And we tried a bunch of things. We tried 3 ideas and then we rolled them back because they had either some bugs or didn't work like we expected it to be. And all of this was done in the last week of the fellowship, and we're just wrapping out. So we were too we were too excited to get the project completed before the fellowship, and in that we really did some awesome work in the last week of the fellowship, I guess.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you about working on WebXR. Hopefully this has been some useful advice. However, we are now going to jump into our next guest, which is Grace. So thank you so much, Sohan. I really do appreciate it. People will be able to find more information. Where can people find you on the interwebs if they want to find out more about the kind of open source stuff that you've been up to? Do you have a Twitter that you want to shout out?
Yeah, it's undefined void. It is rather complicated. I can put that in the chat or somewhere. But I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, and it links to all my other social media, so you can also send me a connection request on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really do appreciate it. I'm now going to introduce Grace. Grace, are you ready to join the stream? Excellent. Hello, Grace. How's it going?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Now, you have been a fellow multiple times, in fact, haven't you? You've been a batch 1 and a batch 2 fellow.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. So you're based in Canada, in
Ottawa right now.
Ottawa. And you're currently studying software engineering at Waterloo.
Yeah. In the wrong city, but yeah.
In the wrong city. Oh, because of gotcha, because you're, yeah. I was like, how does that work? I'm following now. And so in batch 1, you've been an open source fellow twice now. So in batch 1 and batch 2, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfect. So you've been working on kind of pull requests and so on for quite a little while now. And so some of the projects you worked on were Sky Time?
SK Time. Yeah.
SK Time. Wow, I sound like such a noob. And then Pyrocheck, which is one of the Facebook projects that we worked on as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, how did you find when you first started the fellowship? How did you kind of find it at first getting started? And, I imagine probably found it kind of overwhelming when you first kind of got told, right, you're going to be working on issues with this project. And you're like, oh, it's a big project. It's a lot bigger than anything I've ever worked on before. How was that?
That pretty much describes it pretty well. So I did the fellowship right after I graduated high school. So I basically did not have any open source experience at all. And then I think the first issue that I tried to work on was from SK Time, and then it was introduced to me as a Python machine learning library, and I was like, whoa, I don't know how to do that at all. And I didn't really have any experience with open source prior to that either, so it was definitely a very steep learning curve. But I guess overall, after we did some of the hackathons and then we actually started using the tools, everything just kind of came together and it became a lot easier to keep moving after you got started.
Interesting. Awesome stuff. So you said you jumped into the fellowship straight out of high school. What kind of top tips do you have for people who, have I imagine, out of high school, you don't really have much experience. You haven't done like a previous internship or anything. And so what kind of things would you recommend to people that helped you to stand out from the rest of the crowd?
Yeah, so I guess like one thing that I like caught on was that school wasn't really going to teach me how to use like GitHub or like get started on open source. So I guess like just like I guess taking the initiative to try and like learn how to use Git on your own, trying out like new projects, like joining hackathons is also a really great way to like just get started in using these tools. Yeah, I think that's like something that students should try to do on their own.
Yeah, definitely. Hackathons, honestly, I couldn't agree with you more. Like when I was so in the UK, our equivalent of high school, you could say, like what you do when you're like 16 to 18 is called sixth form. And we had to build this big project, and I learned so much about how things worked by building that project. But like that was because I self-taught how to do a lot of it. We did like databases in Microsoft Access. I had like really didn't understand how like databases worked until you actually try and like implement a database into a project, which is something you could do like at a hackathon. And another good example would be I had no idea how object-oriented programming worked until I actually started like trying to build things using object-oriented programming, and then I was like, oh, I now understand why you might want to do this. Because at first I was like, this stuff sounds stupid. Why would you ever want to do this? Like, it sounds really dumb. And then you like do it and you're like, oh, I should have started doing this like years ago. But yeah, it sounds awesome. So when you started working on the fellowship, working on in open source, the first pull request I believe you worked on was contributing to a Docker image for PyroCheck. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So did you have much experience with Docker before you got started?
Like very little. In high school, I did an internship at Nokia, and then we worked with Docker a little bit. But to be honest, I didn't really like completely understand how Docker was used and like why it was used. But then when I started contributing to PISA, so I have a MacBook M1, and it turns out that it's not actually compatible with PISA. So I was like, oh no, I can't use it. So then the maintainer suggested that I use the Docker image to build it instead. And I didn't know what a Docker image was. So then I had to read through all the docs, and yeah, eventually this was like the workaround that we came up with. And it was really cool because I got to, I guess like learn how Docker worked and then build an image that actually solved like an issue that I was facing. And then I guess like I just afterwards I contributed this to the repository because I think like some other fellows were also having the same issue, like getting set up, not because they had an M1, but just because like I guess there were some errors like with setting up. So yeah, it was like kind of like a happy accident that just happened.
The humble M1 brag in the chat. I'm also using a Mac Mini with an M1 chip in it, so I'm gonna brag too. But yeah, I've also had a few issues where like sometimes things just don't like running on ARM. I've had it with Raspberry Pis too, where I tried to run a Docker, like a thing which is like very much designed for x86, and then you try and run it on ARM and it goes, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, it's a bit of a pain, but yeah, I think worth it.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to using M1, but yeah, as you said, like I think that's probably one of the best ways to learn is like when you have your own problem and you're trying to like solve it, like it feels a lot more relevant to you, right? When you're solving someone else's problem, it's kind of difficult to kind of like see the purpose behind it. You're like, why are we doing it this way? Whereas you're solving like it's like a kind of a small problem, but like making something run on your laptop is like a important but kind of a small problem. But just doing that little small thing is a huge gain in knowledge for like how Docker works, which who knows what you'll end up doing now with your knowledge of Docker. Because Docker is super useful. And again, I'm going to plug it again. The Facebook production engineering track will be all about stuff like Docker, Kubernetes, and all of those kind of things, and how you can kind of easily deploy things into the cloud and so on, and how you can update things and all that kind of cool stuff. So yeah, getting that running on your Mac must have been a pain, but now you got it running because Docker does have a preview for M1, which is pretty nice. Yeah, you worked on a Docker image for PyroCheck. So I imagine that now you'd worked out how to get things running. You were like, oh, I'm an expert now. Docker's like my jam.
Only slightly, but I'm still learning. There's a lot of things I didn't know before, like while making it. I guess I did like a lot of inefficient things, but then thank goodness for the maintainer who was always like commenting on my code and like giving me suggestions on how to improve. And then I read through a lot of his suggestions, and then made the Docker image like a lot less redundant, because I had like a lot of things I didn't know how to do before.
Awesome. Awesome stuff. Now, having a little look further down, you worked on SK Time series plotting. Now, series plotting, I've used pandas before, and series plotting is it's like fancy stuff with tables. Am I right?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about this pull request and what you worked on.
Yeah, for sure. So it actually wasn't like a very large pull request. It was this was actually my first pull request that I made last year. And it was basically like a bug that was in the issues. And then I saw it, and then I thought this would be like kind of like a good place to start. And I definitely agree with like the stuff you said earlier about not having to understand like the whole library in order to be able to make a contribution, because I for sure didn't understand all the complex algorithms that were somewhere else in another folder. But like for this one issue, all I had to do basically was to kind of like go on the internet and like search up matplotlib and then pandas, and then kind of figure out how that worked. I read the documentation and everything, and yeah, like the fix itself was actually like quite simple. So I guess just like getting past that like initial barrier of like, I guess like taking that step to like actually try and fix an issue. That's
awesome.
What I learned from that pull request.
Awesome. So what kind of advice would you give people who are looking to do a similar thing and to get over that initial hurdle? Any like pro tips that you want to share with the crowd that you think will be helpful for getting them started?
Yeah, so I guess for me, there's probably two things that stood out the most. So first one would be kind of like I said, would be to like start small. I think like for my like the actual first issue that I tried to take on was implementing like a new algorithm. I think it was like TS Chief, and like I was trying to do that like from like a scientific paper or something, and it was just like a really complex kind of thing, and I kind of got stuck a lot. So I think just like starting small, maybe going through like the issues that are labeled like first time issue, like good for beginners, like that's a good place to kind of get your hands dirty and like start contributing to a repo, even if you don't understand everything. So yeah, I guess start small is my first piece of advice. And I think secondly, just like I wish I knew that people are actually very friendly, because I was quite shy and like intimidated by everyone who knew a lot more than I did. But I think like once I actually started talking to people through the fellowship, I realized that, you know, everyone's like really friendly and like super willing to help. So asking for help definitely helped speed up the process of getting started in open source for me.
Oh yeah, definitely. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. I feel imposter syndrome just talking to fellows because I can write code. I can write reasonable code, I like to say. You might disagree, but you know, it's what it is. And then I see the fellows do these like mad complicated things with like JavaScript, and I'm just like, I have no idea what's going on. And they're like, oh, Will, can you help me debug my code? And I'm like, I don't think you realize we have mentors for a reason, because I have no idea what's going on.
Me too.
Yeah, so whenever the fellows do stuff, they're like, oh, I don't feel like I'm good enough. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this is super impressive stuff, honestly. Like, you're surrounded by also lots of very clever people, but you're all very talented. And so, like, in your very, like, this is the thing, right? It's like a vocal minority. You are, like, surrounded by very smart people. But, like, in the greater scheme of things, right, you are really impressive at what you do. And, you know, like, if you walk down the street, right, people are not going to know what you know. And so you are, like, you are unique and you are special and talented, but people go, oh, but I'm not, because everyone around here is like knows all the same things. It's like, well, yeah, that's what happens when you join a program dedicated to learning these things. Like, of course you're going to be surrounded by people who know, like, learning the same stuff. But awesome stuff. Now we're getting close on time, so I want to ask you your final tip for the folks watching. What other tips or anything like that you would recommend after spending almost 6 months on the fellowship to help people make the most of getting started in open source and generally just getting involved in the fellowship? Any top tips that you want to share?
I'd say like, just do it. I think it's like a great way to it's like a great entry point. And even like after entering, it's like a great way to continue growing and developing your skills, because like there's a lot of experienced maintainers and other contributors in the community, and they're always willing to help you like improve how you write code. And it's also like a great thing to do like on the side, because I know a lot of us have school and you can't commit to a full-time job, but just like contributing on like real projects that people will use, I think that drastically helps to improve like the quality of your code and also like I guess like what you're capable of. And it also is like I guess it just like it makes you like feel pretty like productive that you're like doing something cool.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Awesome. Someone put in the chat, I'm going to bring this up on the screen. Being a part of a community of very smart people is a good problem to have, though. I would 100% agree. In the last, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I've gone from surrounding myself by people I didn't really get on with and were, I don't want to say, like, less smart than me, but, like, weren't into, like, programming. To people who are like into the same sort of stuff as me and stuff, and as a result I learn a lot from them, a lot more than I learned like previously. You know, the whole idea of surrounding yourself with smart people or like is better than the opposite, because you learn so much from those people, right? And I've learned so much by just being surrounded by people who know lots more about the things that I know. You know, I can just go, whoa, okay, so how do these things work, and ask lots of questions. And especially in an environment where you can ask stupid questions and no one's going to judge you, right? I love that. But because I ask lots of stupid questions, but that's why I end up growing, because you have to ask stupid questions to understand. Awesome stuff.
Yeah,
well, thank you so much,
sure.
Grace. Really do appreciate you joining. I'm going to now take you off the stream. And Geeta, are you ready to rock and roll? Hell yeah. And we have our final guest of the day. Geeta, how's it going?
It's been great. Just graduated, feeling a bit emotional, but feeling proud of myself.
Awesome. You should definitely feel proud. Is it in graduation from the fellowship or graduation from university?
So it's graduation from the fellowship. So I'm a sophomore at SRM Institute of Technology, Chennai, India. And yeah, it's been really great, being a part of MLH Fellowship for the past 3 months.
Awesome stuff. For those of you who don't know, we had the graduation for the Batch 2 Fellowship yesterday. You can find the replay on Twitch. It was an awesome ceremony. I had a lot of fun making it, and I had a lot of fun watching it. Some of the speeches from the fellows, touch my heart every time. I would highly recommend it if you're interested to hear a little bit more about what the fellows and pod leaders and all of the staff got up to over the last 3 months. But just because the fellowship has ended doesn't mean your open source journey has ended. Yep, Wampa, they grow so fast. I couldn't agree more. I'm like the dad, and I'm like, oh, they're leaving for university. They're leaving home. It's so sad. I've had to do it 3 times now, and it hasn't changed once. But I'm so happy to have you here today. Now, you worked on some pretty awesome stuff as well on the fellowship. Let's have a quick look. So you, my friend, worked on some awesome stuff with AWS. Is that correct? Awesome. Yes. What kind of projects did you work on? You worked on the Amplify, didn't you?
Yes. So during the during the orientation hackathon, we were given a list of projects, like the sponsors who are ready to contribute to let the fellows contribute to the projects. And from the beginning, AWS Amplify was one of my dream, and I always had that keen eye onto that project. So I started by implementing it in a very small project called Threaded. So it was a version of Reddit, but it was a single subreddit. So that is how we learned about AWS Amplify. And then when the selection came in and I got selected into AWS Amplify, then, it's been a great journey since then. So I've been working on the AWS Amplify CLI for the MLH Fellowship.
So my question for you, assume I know nothing about the fellowship projects, which I mean is somewhat true. I know some things, but for those of you who've never heard of AWS Amplify, what is it and why is it so cool?
So AWS Amplify is a framework which allows front-end developers to focus more on front-end code and let AWS handle all of your backend code. It allows you to build backends using GraphQL, using REST. It allows you to have storage containers all at at some commands. And it allows you to deploy production level code at a very fast pace. Awesome.
That sounds really, really cool. So if folks are interested in getting started in that, and it's all open source, which is awesome as well. Cool. So you worked on the CLI specifically. Now, what kind of stuff? So I imagine the CLI does a lot of things, which can be a little bit overwhelming. How did you find that in like initially getting started, meeting with the maintainer and finding an issue to work on?
So the interesting part about working on a CLI application is you don't have any front end to see, or you don't have anything like you can't see any bugs that easily. So debugging issues in a CLI requires a bit of information of what the CLI is, and that is where I would suggest people working on CLIs to really read through the code. Now, AWS Amplify is a mono repo, which means that in that single repository we have 70 plus sub packages. So, going
Wait,
through
hold up. The whole thing's in one repo.
Yes, it's like React or any other mono repos. So it's called a mono repo, and it's pretty overwhelming for a starter like me. So I was almost like I used to contribute to open source projects, but never had I thought that I would get a chance to contribute in such a huge project. So it was a great ride going through the code base, and I would really thank my maintainers to actually help us go through the code base to explain what each and every command does. And we made something very interesting. So there's this very common thing which developers say, that if you have any problem and you don't find a solution to it, you should make your own solution. So that is where my halfway hackathon project comes in. So that is the AWS Amplify CLI monorepo tour. So it's like a developer documentation which helps onboarding of new contributors to the AWS Amplify CLI, and all of it's fully open source. We always encourage new contributors to contribute to that. So that is the monorepo tour is like a notebook for all the 4 fellows working on the AWS CLI. We wanted the people. We wanted to take down all the notes we learned and how the code flows. Because client-side documentation always exists for a product, but what about a developer-side documentation?
Yeah, awesome. That's very interesting. The Halfway Hackathon is also one of the really cool parts of the fellowship. Actually, do you want to give us a quick rundown of what the Halfway Hackathon is for folks who don't know, and what the kind of theme of the hackathon is?
So the Halfway Hackathon is a hackathon which is at the 6-week marker of the fellowship. So it's literally the halfway. And that is where you are given you're encouraged to form your team alongside other pod mates. So for the first 6 weeks, you're always in your pod, you're working with your pod mates, but then you need that exposure, to get to mix with other pod mates and, work on projects. And you're given various tracks on which you can build, and one of them is to help in onboarding of fellows, and in helping with developer documentation, and that is where we targeted our AWS Amplify monorepo tool.
Awesome stuff. Awesome. Well, if people want to find that, they can find it on GitHub. I'm sure you can drop a link later on. Awesome stuff. So I'm going to jump into some of the pull requests you made and how you got started with those. So looking at one of them, you pull request. Wow, the numbers on these, right? Normally pull requests have like double digits. This is quadruple digits. 6986 number. Pull request 86986. Damn. I'm going to screen share this actually, because I feel like it. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at this. So here's one of the pull requests you made, and this is called Amplify Init Error Handling, Validation and Confusing Error Codes. And so I can see you've done a really good use here of like writing out what the heck you're actually working on, because from a maintainer perspective, right, they want to know what you're actually adding. And so you've done a pretty good job of explaining what's going on. Screenshots are awesome. You can show how it actually works. So yeah, you want to give us a quick rundown? Oh, I realize people can't see the screen. Hang on. There you go. But if you want to give us a quick rundown of like what this is and what you worked on, and generally how you found it.
So this is a pretty interesting pull request which I made. So my first pull request which I made was a simple documentation pull request where I fixed certain scripts which were erroring. But then I jumped on to handling the developer experience of the CLI. And this is where I would actually recommend new contributors to huge repositories that your pull request should be a bit explanatory by itself, because in these huge in these huge repositories, the maintainers are actively dealing with 100 plus issues at the same time, and they really don't have that much time to jump into your code and go through it. So it is highly recommended you should have a clean pull request with all the changes mentioned. So here I deal with some of the error handling in the Amplify init workflow. So amplify init command is when you want to initiate a amplify project in your GitHub repository, and we were facing certain validation issues there. So I fixed those with regular expressions, and then I got a great review from one of the product managers at Amplify that the AWS SDK that had a function which could actually validate a credential before even executing any command with that credential. So that is called the secure token service, or AWS STS, and then I implemented that. And last, I think that pull request also closes one more issue where there was a very confusing error prompt, and all of this comes from the community feedback. So AWS Amplify is a very community-based product, and we take the community feedback very seriously. And the community had requested to fix some error codes which were confusing, and we as developers, we took that as a responsibility to fix those.
Awesome stuff. Having a look at your pull request, you had a load of people give you some good feedback, give you code reviews, which is not only useful for you, because here's the thing, right? It's all well and good you adding a feature and adding it to a pull request, but getting feedback from these maintainers who have years and years of experience is super useful, because you go, oh, okay, now I know how to make more maintainable code. I know how to better make it easier for other people to understand, all of that kind of good stuff. Code reviews are honestly underrated for beginners, because it's very hard for you to get a code review from someone who's knows what they're doing. We're all getting started. We would like to think we know. I mean, you all know what you're doing. You've contributed to big open source projects, but we're kind of getting familiar with how that all works. And so you must have found it really beneficial to have some people come along and give you some top tips on how they can how you can improve your code and how you can generally get better at contributing to open source.
Yes, I would agree a lot, and this is where I really thank MLH Fellowship to introduce me to the maintainers. Because the maintainers at AWS Amplify, they're really great. So we had this very common term in our stand-up meetings with the maintainers that we are just a IM away. And I can guarantee and I can vouch that they were just an IM away. The code reviews and all, so there was this very funny story where I was told to rebase the feature which I had implemented, and it was in this specific pull request, and due to some misinformation, I just merged it. So then the maintainer immediately reached out to me, and he explained me the whole process. I was so thankful of such a person explaining me all this stuff, and it was a great experience working with the maintainers. So I would definitely recommend reaching out to the Amplify maintainers on the Amplify Discord for the people who do not have a direct contact channel, because they are very helpful, and they always they help the new contributors.
Awesome. That's so nice to hear. We all make mistakes. I have made some mistakes. I scared Swift at the beginning of the year because I accidentally sent 1,000 emails from the wrong email address or something. Honest mistake. Didn't mean to do that, right? But he helped me. He didn't get angry at me. He just kind of walked me through how I could not do it again, right? Because that's the thing, right? Getting angry at someone for doing the wrong thing is unhelpful, because you don't learn from it, right? You don't teaching someone how they can fix the problem, how they can improve is really, really important. And so Emily's been there. Exactly, right? It's important to teach people how they can improve. And so having the AWS team be oh, let me run you through the process, because they went, oh, they don't know the process. That's fine. That'll be why they did it like this. Let me run them through the process so that next time they know how to do it. And looking at your pull request now, you absolutely aced that. Awesome stuff. Well, before we wrap things up here and we jump into the Q&A, and someone's already said it in chat, I see you. Top tip is such a British thing to say. Did you know I'm British? So what would you say in comparison? Top tip? What would you say otherwise? Top tip, pro move, piece of advice. I don't know. There you go. Piece of advice. What is your piece of advice for everyone interested in getting started in open source that you learned in your journey on the fellowship?
So I think Soham and Grace have covered quite a lot, but I could say something which is very specific to mono repos or huge repos which have huge code bases. So it does seem frustrating, and I myself have spent over a month reading the code base. But to get started with huge projects, you actually have to read the code base, and it is pretty important to do that. So don't fear from reading the code base and asking the maintainers on the community discords or any way. I'm sure big projects have some kind of communication channel to go through, and don't fear to ask the maintainers of how this code works and how it, because when contributing to a huge code base, there is a lot of integration testing, or there's a lot of testing going on, and there's a huge workflow behind it. So until and unless you know the parts on how it works, you have to you cannot contribute that much. So take some time, relax, and read the code.
Awesome stuff. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really do appreciate it. Someone says brilliant stuff in the chat. Well, I'm going to quickly pull you off screen, go and do a little talk, and then we'll bring all of you on stream to do a Q&A. So I'll bring you back in just a second. Well, that was awesome to hear from our 3 previous fellows, all having unique perspectives on how they got into open source, because there is no kind of one size fits all way of like contributing to open source. It is so varied, and that's what's the beauty about it, because you can contribute to small projects, big projects, complicated projects like AWS that are all in one repo for some reason. I'm sure there's a reason behind it. But now we're going to do a Q&A with the folks. So if you've got any questions, make sure to get those down below. And again, we have just launched the new Facebook production engineering track. You can find out all about it on the website at fellowship.mlh.io. We can't wait to see all of you apply, and we are looking forward to getting all of your applications processed. Application deadline is May 28th, with the program starting on the 7th of June to the 30th of August. So that is something that you're interested in, then I'll definitely check it out and ask any questions you've got in the chat. Now, in just a second, we'll bring out the rest of our folks on. There was a question that I was going to answer, but it's disappeared. Oh yeah, someone said, I get rejected every time from the fellowship, and now I'm in the habit of rejection. Now, that's actually something I wanted to bring up, is I've been rejected loads, and trust me, getting rejected has taught me a lot. I've done a lot of self-reflection as it, it's like, why was I rejected? Now, one of the really nice things about the fellowship is that we try and give you as much feedback in the email to help you understand why you were rejected. It's quite common that when you apply to an internship or a job, that you get a rejection that just says, sorry, not this time. And you're like, was it something I did? Is it my code sample? Have I not got enough experience? Do you want to try and give me an idea? And so we try and give you as much feedback as possible. And we've actually had some really, really awesome people who've been rejected in the summer or fall, and they've come back later on to do a fellowship. They've taken on the advice and they've improved. And it's really awesome to see these people kind of take that advice and then, work with it so that they can come back later. And I would highly recommend people like yourselves doing the same thing. Now, folks, why do you pronounce repo like that? It's because I'm British, all right? Sorry. Before I bring my wonderful fellows on, in the UK, there's like a divide between the North and the South for how you pronounce things. If we had Amy from MLH on right now, she'd probably pronounce things very differently to how I would. And we'd probably have a little dispute about how the North and the South is better. She'd probably be like, oh, the North's better than the South. And I'll be like, you're wrong. But, anyway, that's for another time. Geeta, Saha, and Grace, are you ready to join me for a bit of Q&A? Look at all of these wonderful people. Well, hello, folks. I really do appreciate you joining. So we're going to scroll back up in the chat and have a look at some of these questions. But the first question I've got for all 3 of you is, how do you pronounce repo? Is it repo or repo?
Repo.
We're divided here.
And you're all located like all over the world. And then there's just me saying repo. Repository, though. You don't say repository, or do you?
I support you, Will. I say repository.
Honestly, got to pick better guests where they pronounce things the same way as me. I'm joking. Awesome stuff. So someone asked in the chat, or someone being Juanpa, Will, as manager of the fellowship, what are some of the misconceptions you see students have about open source? Now, I think this is a really good question, because I think some of you will have the same thing from what you saw with your fellows and stuff, but people often think they're not good enough. And I actually saw this in my first year of university. We had our first lecture on discrete mathematics, and a lot of people wanted to drop out like after the first 2 hours of lectures ever, because they were like, oh my goodness, it's super overwhelming. I have no idea what's going on. Of course you're not going to understand what's going on. You've been at university for 2 hours, and you're here for 3 years. Chill out. It's all good. But with patience. And the same is said for open source. We get people who start and they don't want to drop out or something, but they do go, when they first start, they go, whoa, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And it's like, well, that's why we have to we have the application process, because we want to make sure that people are ready for it, because if they're not, they're going to find it quite difficult. And if they're not ready, then we give them advice on how they can get started. But yeah, any of you folks, I'll go kind of top to bottom. Grace, did you find anyone who was kind of like in your pod who was like super overwhelmed, but actually found that once they got started and with a little bit of mentorship, open source was actually not as scary as it seemed?
Yeah, for sure. Like people in my pod and me, honestly. I was like, oh, I don't think because it seems like kind of like intimidating when you look at it from like a higher level and you're just introduced to a project. But I think like once you actually like get started and you put in like a real effort, like a good afternoon on that, and like even reaching out to maintainers and other fellows, I think eventually you'll find that it's like definitely like a doable task.
Awesome stuff. Geeta, got any advice on, did you see any of this in your pod, or did you feel this as well?
So my pod had a lot of genius people, and I was the only one who's getting started into open source. So I can actually relate to that, what you said, that you feel that you're not good enough. And since I was handed such a huge project, that kicked in a lot of times. And I can say that my pod fellows, my mentors, my maintainers, everyone helped me overcome that. And as I said, in due time, after reading the code base, you'll get more confident. And then once you make a single pull request and it gets merged, and then then the ride's uphill.
Awesome stuff. And Soham, any did you observe any of this as well?
Yeah, definitely with my own project. I mean, I was terrified looking at the documentation for WebXR because it was so complicated. Everything was like totally over my head. But then eventually, we settled down. We spoke to past fellows and their contributions and how they took the project down bit by bit. And I think that really helped a lot, speaking to the past fellows.
Awesome stuff. Now, having a look in the chat, this is a really interesting question. So how different are the communities? Like if I'm part of one OS community, is it going to be different to adapt to a different community and work with them? Now, obviously you folks have worked in the different kind of open source communities as well as the Major League Hacking community. And so have any of you kind of experienced the communities being different and how to adapt and so on? Grace, any idea, any thoughts there?
Yeah, for sure. So I've contributed to a couple of repos, I guess, and I would say there's definitely a difference in how the communication works between repos. Some maintainers are a lot more active than others, so it's definitely better to I guess have an active maintainer who reviews your pull requests and you can easily talk to. I think that most large open source communities probably have some sort of Discord or Slack. So I'm in the Slack for SK time right now, and I think other ones might have Discords as well. So yeah, it definitely depends based on the repo. But if you choose one that you like and you stick to it, and everyone's very active, then I think it's a good way to meet people and get advice.
Awesome stuff. Now, because I'm cautious of time, I'm going to ask one of you a question each and kind of run through the questions. So we'll kind of rotate it like that. Now, this is a really interesting question as well. I keep saying that. But any tips for freshers who to find an inclusive community for open source? Perhaps a community that has patience for someone new to open source. Now, our wonderful friend Eddie Hub, I believe, is a pretty inclusive. Also, the Major League Hacking community is pretty inclusive as well. Any other communities that you folks are aware of? Anyone wants to jump in? Because I know some of you work in open source communities as well as outside the fellowship now. Fellowship kind of opened you up to the kind of wider community, and you kind of found these smaller ones. Geeta, any kind of top tips for inclusive communities?
So yeah, I haven't been on so many communities as much as Soham or Grace has been. They have been. So, but I can say for a fact, I can vouch that Will has said the correct thing. So the Major League community, the Major League Hacking community is a great open source community and is very welcoming. And I can even say the AWS Amplify community, it's really welcoming. I've never faced a open source community which is not welcoming at all. So it might be good luck, but it's always there's this passion in all of the open source communities to help new contributors join in, and that is what I love about open source, and that is why I contribute.
Awesome stuff. Now, so this is actually pretty interesting because I think it's like a misconception about open source. But to contribute to these open source projects, do we need to know things like make files or anything extremely low level like C code or assembly? Now, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but like some open source projects have absolutely nothing to do with C or make files or anything like that. In fact, they require you to know JavaScript or Python or things like that. And so, did you work on any open source projects that used C or not used C?
I've worked with open source community that use C++ but never C. I think unless your community, unless you're contributing to Linux kernel or Git, you don't need to learn C. For most use cases, I think Python is something that's really widespread in open source. Even communities that use JavaScript use some form or the other in Python. So yeah. Python or JavaScript, you can contribute with those.
Something I've kind of like, it's like a job almost, you know, when you're starting to work out what you like working in programming, like, I enjoy, so for example, I prefer writing Python backend sort of stuff over front end. I prefer that over data science. You know, I'm a kind of backend web guy, I would say. I don't like JavaScript. And, you know, it's the same with a job, right? I'm not going to look for jobs writing low-level C. However, some people, that's exactly what they want to do. And I feel like the same is with open source. It's kind of like looking at like a job, right? You know, just don't contribute to the projects that don't interest you or aren't really the kind of areas that you're into. Like, I'm probably never going to contribute to a data science open source project, but I might contribute to a web one because that's where my skills better align. Let's have a look for some more questions from the folks. Get those questions in the chat. Now, here's the thing. The fellowship is meant to take you from 1 to 10 after you go from 0 to 10 yourself. You are 100% correct. So to go from 0 to 1 yourself, I'd highly recommend attending some hackathons. I'd recommend going and taking part in, you know, when you see these like local hack day events and stuff like that, where you can get involved in like lots of different technologies and stuff like that, build some personal projects. Grace, any tips on like how you can kind of help take yourself from 0 to 1 to help you kind of be eligible for the fellowship? Looks like Grace has turned into a robot. I think you cut out there. If you want to repeat what you said, you turned into a little bit of a robot.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so like I was saying, I guess it's just hackathons for me. That's how I got started, and that's like how I'm still continuing to learn new things. I think like even during the fellowship, the halfway hackathon was a huge thing that helped me grow and like piece everything together again. Because it's like there's a lot of workshops, like mentors, like people you work with, new tools that you get to learn for like a specific project or purpose. So yeah, I'd say it's that's the biggest thing for me.
Awesome stuff. Now having a look down here, someone says, any tips for getting selected into the fellowship? I have been rejected for the last 2 sessions. Now, out of interest, did any of you apply to like the fellowship and get rejected initially and then have to like and reapplied? Also, well, Grace, I'm going to throw the question to you. What did you do to help yourself go from being rejected to accepted? And any tips that you think you could share that you learned along the way?
So I applied for batch 0, which was the first batch, and that was like just when I finished high school. So I really didn't have like any experience. And then I guess, like I said already, I just like joined a couple of hackathons. I learned some things, added some projects to my portfolio, and then like during the next batch, I guess, I was selected for the interview, and then I had like projects I could talk about because I did them for hackathons. And then I was passionate about the projects I worked on because I was interested in it, and I think that kind of like maybe gave me an advantage.
Awesome. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Definitely, like building up a portfolio of projects gives you lots of things to talk about, right? Things you broke, things you like got stuck on, things you learned on the way. Because trust me, you're gonna break a lot of things. That's just that's part of the game. Let's have a look for any more questions. Let's have a look. Emily says sign up for Init 2022. Now, Init 2022 is another event that Major League Hacking is running in the summer. After huge success from Local Hack Day, we're running a similar thing in the summer called Init 2022. So if you're looking to improve some skills this summer, you know, you're looking to have a bit of fun, build some stuff you've never done before, totally sign up for that. You can find more information out on majorleaguehacking.com. You can find the link here. Emily can get me a short URL too if she's feeling kind, and you can learn about the new mascot. The mascots, I actually don't have any of the. I have a load of stickers somewhere with the mascot on. Awesome stuff. It looks like we're running out of questions now, but I'm going to quickly go through around the group and ask for your last bit of like pro advice, life hack. As someone corrects me in chat and was like, "You're wrong, Will. It's life hack," or like advice, not top tip. Peasants. No, I'm joking. But Sohan, what would you say you would recommend people to do if they're interested in getting started with the fellowship?
I would say try to work on some really cool projects, depending on which track you're applying to. If you're on Explorer, it would be slightly little competitive, but if you're applying to something like open source, try to get more projects that you can explain well while you have some key purpose why you build that project in the first place. And it can actually be a hackathon project. Hackathons are really good ways to build project in a 24-hour period. But you should basically be really passionate about what you've built, and it should have like a purpose, and that I think is really important.
Awesome stuff. Now, I'm actually going to tweak the question slightly because someone put an even better question in chat, which is your biggest takeaways from the fellowship, which people can learn from. But one question I want to quickly jump in is someone asked, is the Explorer program discontinued? No, it is not. However, we are kind of pausing it and we're going to retweak it a little bit and try and make it a little bit easier for people to just jump in, try and open it up to even more people, because we realized that it's really beneficial to help people get from that 0 to 1. And so we're going to reopen it up later in the summer. We'll have some more information about that soon. But for now, we'll be kind of delaying it and it won't be starting alongside the open source software engineering and the production engineering track. But we'll definitely be running it just slightly later, and we're going to try and open it up to even more people, because I know, Grace, you started doing some of the Explorer stuff and you found it really useful. But we're going to try and make it a little bit easier for people to get stuck in and only do like a few weeks at a time and so on. Still to be confirmed. So yes, your takeaways from the program. Grace, what would you say your biggest takeaways from the fellowship after doing it twice now were?
I guess I'd say it's okay. So I guess for me, the learning curve was kind of like not exactly steep. It was more like flat for a little bit and then steep. Because I think there's like kind of like a barrier when you first like get started and you don't really know like where to go or like how to start. So like don't be discouraged if you're like trying to start out and you're like finding that you get stuck a lot, because I promise like as soon as you start like piecing everything together, it becomes a lot easier to keep going and keep growing. And like especially I think for me, a large thing was like hearing all these like technical terms and acronyms that I didn't understand what they meant. But then once you like start understanding the lingo and like understanding how stuff fits together, it becomes like a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. And Geeta, what would you say your biggest takeaways are from the fellowship?
So I would say getting to meet a good bunch of people, including the maintainers, the mentors, the fellows. And second, to get introduced to what the industry standard is. So often when you're working on personal projects, you don't follow what the industry follows, but the fellowship actually allows you to follow, get introduced to all those industry standards and working with on production level code. And the third one, I would say the game nights. I really love those, the Friday game nights.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, I hear a lot of good things about the fun things the pod leaders get up to with your pods. They tell me about it in my weekly meetings with them, and I'm just like, I'm going to share those tips with the other pod leaders. It sounds like something the other ones should do. Awesome. And so, Sohan, I know you've already kind of brushed on it, but what would you say your biggest takeaways are to wrap things up here?
I would say don't be afraid to try something new, and the best way to try something is by doing it. I didn't know anything about WebXR or AR/VR, but I still took that leap because of the project. And to be honest, had it not been for the project, I would have never tried it ever. So don't be afraid to try anything new.
Awesome stuff. Well, thank you so much, folks, for joining me. Really do appreciate it. I'm going to now take you all off the stream and I'm going to just wrap up here. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. Really do appreciate it. Now, we've got a couple more questions specifically about applying to the new programs that I'm going to quickly cover, and then we'll wrap things up here for this wonderful stream with the GitHub education, folks. So someone says, is software engineering basically an externship under a different name? Yep. We've just changed the name to make it a little bit clearer. But yeah, we have open source, the software engineering track, and then the production engineering track available for people to apply to today. And someone asks, is it necessary to do open source before getting selected for the open source fellowship? Now, nope, you don't need to do any open source. Some people have done open source and they kind of submit that as their as their project that they want to talk about in the interviews. But we have a lot of people who've never touched it before, but they're incredibly passionate and they're incredibly talented at, they need that kind of boost to get them to the next step. So hopefully that is useful for you folks there. And then one other question that we had, how is someone asks how to join the community. If you want to join the community, you can head over to mlh.io/events and you can see all of the upcoming events we have over the next few weeks. And then I would recommend signing up to one and going and checking it out. You can join the MLH Discord at discord.mlh.io and you can find out a little bit more about what the community is all about if that is something that you're interested in. So yeah, I recommend having a check out. That's how I got started in all of this, and I must say it's been one of the most life-changing experiences I've ever had. Just to wrap things up, we have a production engineering stuff I want to just quickly cover. So have you ever considered a career in production engineering or DevOps? It's one of the most in-demand skill sets that tech companies are hiring for, yet it is not widely taught. It's a hybrid between software and systems engineers who keep running software smooth behind the scenes and scaling efficiently, because when you're something, like Notion's a great example of this, a product that has boomed because loads of people love it, but they had some difficulties trying to cope with all those people and it got a little bit slow. So that'll be one of the things that you can do there as well. All you need to know is basic coding knowledge and we'll teach you everything you need to know about systems. So this summer we're teaming up with the Facebook folks to teach 100 students about production engineering skills through the new track of the MLH Fellowship. Over the course of 12 weeks, fellows will learn all the skills and build a professional network they need to launch their careers. So if that's something that you're interested in, you should totally check it out. Yep, someone says in the chat, so that'll be like SCR roles, which is site reliability engineers, which is all super interesting stuff. When did I join MLH? End of 2018 when I started university. So the production engineering track, for those of you interested in hearing a little bit more about it, it is open for folks in the US, Canada, and Mexico who are either junior or sophomores. But as a Brit, that doesn't make any sense to me. So people graduating at the end of 2022, I believe, or from August 2022 and onwards. And we will be guaranteed a guaranteed stipend of $3,600, and you get to do parts from the Linux Foundation training and certification. We would love to encourage as many folks to apply, including those from underrepresented backgrounds. This is a huge opportunity to help you level up your career, and I can't wait to see some of you starting off in the summer. Awesome stuff. Cool. So I think we'll wrap things up there. People wanted to know the link to Discord, so I will quickly type it in the chat. There we go. It should be putting it in all of the chats. There we go. So as a senior, I can't apply. You won't be able to apply for the production engineering one. However, you can definitely apply for open source and the software engineering track. In fact, I would highly recommend it. Again, you can find all of the requirements on our website at fellowship.mlh.io if you're interested to learn a little bit more about how that all works. Awesome stuff. Well, my name is Will, folks. If you're interested in finding out a little bit more about the fellowship, again, I'm going to put it up on the screen right now because I'm a lovely guy. Fellowship. I can't type. Also, my mechanical keyboard is incredibly loud. If you already sent your application, just drop an email to fellowship@mlh.io and we can sort it out. And you can also, if you apply, this is another pro tip for everyone. If you apply with the same email to a future batch or whatever, it will attach it to your application. So you can make a change before we start reviewing it, and we'll be able to see that. So you can apply again and apply for software engineering and it should sort you out. But another thing that you need to don't worry about is if you're not eligible for one of the tracks, but we think you're really, really talented, we'll automatically move you to the software engineering track or the open source track. Just because you're not eligible necessarily for one of them, we'll still try and get you in a slot somewhere if we can get you there. All right, folks, that is all from me. I'm going to wrap things up here. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming along. Really do appreciate it. And we'll talk to you all in a little bit. We have our next stream on Thursday where Robbie and I will be talking about how the fellowship helped level up his career, how the fellowship can teach you skills that can level up your career, and how MLH helped him with his career. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, then definitely tune in at 11 a.m. ET on Thursday. All right, folks, I'll talk to you all a little bit later. All right, bye.